His name is Saul Alinsky, and there are still many to whom the name is meaningless. But to millions now he is looked on as a savior, and these are the so-called have-nots, the culturally deprived, the abject poor. They love him, and they ask him in to organize their weakness into a strength and power that has become a frightening threat to the establishment.
There is, I suppose, given a choice, I think I would pick hell. The reason I'd pick hell is because that's where all the have-nots are.
He is disarmingly mild when you meet him, but there is an implacable ferocity about him which is directed at many forces he considers to be at the root of human suffering and misery.
I'm all for it. I think our Air Force and our Army should, after they finish in Vietnam, should come back and bomb the hell out of Mississippi, you know? What would it be? Southern Mississippi instead of northern Mississippi. So we can all get freedom and equality down there, too.
He has called the war on poverty political pornography and says those who run the program represent the greatest feeding trough that has come along for the welfare industry in years. There are always repercussions whenever Saul Alinsky moves into an afflicted ghetto with his Industrial Areas Foundation, perhaps because it is felt he may get some results quicker than the established authorities, whom he ridicules for their boondoggling. He can be scornful of an entire city with one scathing comment.
If you ask me one thing which Los Angeles really needed above anything else, I would say what it needs is a massive enema.
He is one of the few men who appears to be absolutely fearless, especially when it comes to the constant threats he receives by telephone and in the mail.
Death threats? I'll probably get knocked off. I think with all this notoriety and all this stuff that goes up, that there's always some kooky crackpot who will say, you know, I'll get national headlines if I knock him off, which he will, you know.
This, then, is an opening frame that we put around the self-portrait of one of the most controversial figures in today's gallery of American radicals. On this KPIX report, Saul Alinsky will share with you his searching, personal assessment of himself, as he did with us in this exclusive half-hour titled, I'd Organize Hell. My name is Jack Bunzel. We'll journey to Carmel, California to meet Saul Alinsky in just a few moments.
There is no nice way of getting things changed. And it's time that a good part of our country began to wake up and live in the world as it is, rather than the world as we would like it to be.
Saul Alinsky has become a national byword synonymous with poverty. He is the severest critic of the so-called establishment and its handling or mishandling of enormous sums of money intended to alleviate the misery of the poor. Alinsky is executive director of the Industrial Areas Foundation, a business that will, upon invitation from the poor and from religious groups, move into a ghetto area and literally organize the poor into a powerful, articulate force demanding a voice and a hand in the administration of their own welfare. Tonight on KPIX Reports, it is our privilege to have as guest commentator John H. Bunzel, whose television series, The American Voter, won a national award, author of several volumes on American politics, and an associate professor of political science at San Francisco State College, to comment on the impact Saul Alinsky has already had and may have on the future. I first came across Saul Alinsky through his book Reveille for Radicals, which came out in 1946. Saul Alinsky now looms as a controversial titan, nationally and in recent times, notably in Oakland. His shadow has loomed tall. $200,000 was raised by the Presbyterian Church with the intent of inviting Alinsky's Industrial Areas Foundation to come in to organize the poor. But in our exclusive meeting with Saul Alinsky some weeks ago, the issue was in doubt. However, his comments on it were characteristically pungent. He lives in the Carmel Highlands in an area that is in itself characteristically opposed to his own activities. We met him at his home, and our first questions concerned the then likelihood that he would make Oakland the scene of his next organization of the poor.
I have stated that any question about our coming into Oakland is purely academic, unless there is an across-the-board, bona fide invitation from the local people themselves. We're not one of these colonial powers like your community funds, or I don't know what you call them in San Francisco, crusades or something. We call them the white feather funds. They're simple representatives of the establishment, and they operate on the basis that they know what's good for the poor people, and by God, the poor people are going to get it whether they like it or not, even if it kills them, you know. We're going to do them good. And just like most of these agencies, they're put into these communities without the people being asked whether they want them, whether they don't want them. Precisely like a colonial power would operate as far as moving into a primitive country, so to speak. Now, we do not do this. We only go in upon the invitation and the request of the people, so that no one can ever say to us that we're outsiders. No one can ever say to us, who asked you to come in here? No one can ever say to us, what's your racket? We can say to the people in the community, we're here because you asked for us to come in here. In Rochester, New York, out of a population of 35,000, we received individually signed petitions, more than 13,000 people out of 35,000. And you figure the number of children that make up a total population of 35,000, you can almost say that every Negro in Rochester signed the petitions. Every civil rights group requested our coming in. Every church within the Negro community. Why, in Buffalo, New York, where the budget is about $175,000, a budget which has been raised now. I'm going to Buffalo this week. The Negro community, the low-income Negro community, out of their own pockets, put up more than $30,000 of that budget. And why? Because they want this. This is their own. And we go in there, we organize them so that they can have power. And by power, I mean exactly the way Webster's Unabridged describes it, as the ability to act, where they can become citizens, or because of their power, they can have a place at the decision-making table, have something to say about their own future, the future of their kids, and as a consequence, be part of the American family. Now, this basically is where a lot of the controversy comes out of. A lot of the heat. Well, it comes out of a lot of things. For one thing, I do the unforgivable. You can attack the establishment and you can get away with it. You know? They may get teed off at you. You can insult them and still survive. But I laugh at them, and this is one thing they will not tolerate. And it's going to be an interesting situation because I'm going to keep on laughing at them as long as I got breath to laugh on them.
Somewhere in his background, Saul Alinsky developed an attitude toward life that has permeated almost everything he has done. What might be called an outlook of realism, in the sense that he feels it is better to expect the worst of conditions, if not of people, because life usually works out that way. If he is sometimes a cynic about the present state of affairs, he is not by nature or commitment a pessimist. In his comments on the kind of world people would like to have, and the world that we really have, at least as he sees it, one gets the feeling that he believes he can have some effect on political trends, particularly where any war on poverty is concerned.
In the world as it is, people move primarily because of self-interest. In the world as it is, the real question has never been the sort of silly one about the end justifying the means. It's always been, does this particular end justify this particular means? If you understand that, it explains many things around. In the world as it is, you have to start from where you are and not from where you would wish you would be. And this doesn't mean that the fact that you accept the world as it is, that in the slightest sense, that it negates or dilutes your desire to strive towards the world that you would like it to be. But if you're going to have any kind of a chance of achieving the kind of world you would like it to be, then you have to begin with the world as it is. When we're fighting for low-income groups, having their own economic opportunities, and having the power, which is theirs by right as American citizens, this is what is basic in the Civil Rights Revolution. This is basic with low-income whites. And frankly, all that we're doing is assuming that the American Revolution began in '76, but it still goes on. It's going to go on for a long time. And this country is all divided into Tories and radicals, just like it was. And they're still fighting it out on the same issues. I'm going to look at the issue of representation. We may talk about the fact that the poor should have political equality and that we respect them and so forth, but we don't, in fact. Emotionally, we consider them a bunch of poor slobs. And what do? We go out and we scramble the works up in Vietnam for home rule and for independence down in South Vietnam. We don't have it in Mississippi. We don't have it in our District of Columbia. I'm all for it. I think our Air Force and our Army should, after they finish in Vietnam, should come back and bomb the hell out of Mississippi, you know? What would it be? Southern Mississippi instead of northern Mississippi. So we can all get freedom and equality down there, too.
We were impressed by the fervor of Saul Alinsky whenever the subject of poverty, deprivation, justice, and injustice entered his comments. The history of the world would clearly have been very different had Saul Alinsky been in a position of supreme power at the end of, let us say, the Second World War. This becomes clear from the comments he has made about others who are also high on his list of the arch enemies of humanity.
As a Jew, I have a certain amount of, shall we say, congenital social protest inside of me. Because my people have been pushed around, well, you know, from the beginning of time. From the beginning when, I suppose, when the concept of love came on this earth, why they burned us at the piers at the Inquisition. They put us in the gas ovens and Dachau and so on. Maybe it was that. Maybe it was something, maybe it was a rejection of my own father. My own father's values were strictly on the dollar side. And so maybe I rejected materialism on that. Fine thing for me to be saying with my son sitting standing here, you know. I'm sure he's rejected certain things because of what I represented. Maybe it's because I grew up in the slums and I hated poverty. I don't know. I do know that every time I saw anything, whether it be a people, the sharecroppers, or whether it be people on strike or people in suffering, and they shouldn't be, well, I'd get very, very angry about it. And when I got angry, I'd do something. Let me say this. To me, the most immoral, the worst kind of person, the nadir of just human rot, is a kind of person who doesn't do anything. I believe very firmly in the old Edmund Burke statement that evil only triumphs when good men do nothing. Much as I hated the Nazis, and I don't know anybody who hated them more than I did, I wanted everyone from a block captain up shot once the war was over. Even in those conversations with the editors of Harper's, I was questioned about my feeling on the bomb, and I pointed out that one of the feelings I had was that it had been dropped on the wrong place. It should have been dropped in Berlin instead of on Hiroshima. But unfortunately, we didn't have it ready at that time, you know. You should have seen my West German mail on that one, if anyone thinks Nazism is dead. But much as I hated these Nazis, I hated far more these good people who would look out their windows, see these political prisoners being put into the vans, pull the curtains, turn to each other, point out how horrible, immoral, and awful it was, but they did nothing. And you can always tell these characters. They go around with a marker cane on them. you can always recognize is branded across their forehead. It either reads one of two ways. Either, I agree with your objectives, but not with your tactics. See? That absolves them. Then you ask them, well, what would you do? Well, we'd like to think about it, because they haven't got any answers.
Saul Alinsky has been called a Jewish atheist, which he vigorously denies, even though he admits his religious convictions are unconventional. There is a certain fatalism in his almost contemptuous attitude to the threats that continue to be made on his life. What he has to say now, however, is underscored by his awareness that change is a law of life, and that the social consequences will be felt by all of us, like it or not.
Death threats? I'll probably get knocked off. I think with all this notoriety and all this stuff that goes up, that there's always some kooky crackpot who will say, I'll get national headlines if I knock him off, which he will, I just don't have the fortification of a religious faith in the conventional sense. I wish I did have one. Then you have the answers. However, I've long since learned, not too long, in the last 10 years or so, I've learned to be able to live comfortably without answers, without definite answers. Because I don't know whether there are such things as answers. Take the business on the hereafter. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. I've never seen the evidence one way or the other. I don't expect to see it during my lifetime. But if there is, I suppose given a choice, I think I would pick hell. The reason I'd pick hell is because that's where all the have-nots are. The currency of the realm shifts. Over here it's money, over there it's virtue. But either way, if you haven't got it, you're stuck. And I've spent all my life with the have-nots, and once I got into hell, I'd start organizing, just like I do down here. And then I'd be in heaven, personally, because this is the thing that gives me the greatest happiness in life. And look out, heaven, here we come. I'm sure there are a lot of grievances that people down there have that should be worked out one way or another. Now, I suppose another thing which causes a lot of hate, real hate on me, is it isn't so much what I say, it's the fact that I say it out loud. These are the things that people know, but it isn't considered tactful to talk about it, It's sort of like doing your toilet in public. Well, life's too short to horse around that way as far as I'm concerned. And I think that things would be a lot better if a lot more people did their toilet out in public. I think, for example, take San Francisco. If you ask me, well, not San Francisco, Oakland. Well, let me play it safe. Let me make it Los Angeles. If you ask me one thing which Los Angeles really needed above anything else, I would say what it needs is a massive enema, Now, you can read into it just what I'm saying, but and there isn't a guy in Los Angeles who doesn't know that, if he's going to be honest on it. That is, a guy who wants to see Los Angeles become more than just a possible pictorial representation for an essay on Sodom and Gomorrah,
Wherever Saul Alinsky goes, and he has helped organize more than 2 million people in 44 communities over the last 30 years, he digs into what he calls a morass of resignation, hopelessness, and despair. Providing tactical advice and technical consultation, he works with the local people in, as he puts it, rubbing raw their resentments and agitating to the point of conflict. But in this personal assessment of himself, Alinsky also reflected on other themes.
Let me talk about something else for a moment. I think that our country is faced with and is infected with the worst subverting infection that it has ever experienced in its history. And what I'm referring to is something called Madison Avenue public relations, middle class, self-righteous, moral hygiene. It affects our domestic way of living. It affects our foreign policy as well. It makes us almost look moronic. You know, you watch TV commercials and you get a picture that the only thing that the American people, and particularly American women, are concerned with is whether their wash is whiter than somebody else's wash, or whether they smell prettier than somebody else, and whether, well, this is what it's become. It's become sort of a deodorized, sterilized kind of culture. And the whole issue is to avoid controversy. Even Johnson comes out with a policy of consensus, you know. No controversy. Controversy is bad. Well, consensus, regardless of whose mouth it comes out of, is nothing more than a huge pile of Madison Avenue manure when you get right down to what it is. It's been a withdrawal, but it goes deeper than that. It's the kind of withdrawal that says, well, I can't figure out the answers here, and it's just too damn bothersome. So we'll let Johnson do it, you know. And then Johnson, as a consequence, gets much more authority and can get away with more things than any president in any other situation except the war period could get away with, because people don't want to challenge it. Oh, it becomes too complex. So you say, well, now what are we really fighting for over there? Have they ever had a free election in South Vietnam? Is this a free country? Do they know what we're talking about on freedom? Well, then the answer always is, when you talk that way and you're giving aid and comfort to Hanoi, you know, you sound like Thomas. You can't get into discussions on the thing. You get a situation also where, as part of this whole consensus deal, there's a very bitter vindictiveness that's seeping into the country, where if you oppose somebody, there will be sharp retaliations against you, almost reminiscent in its own way of the old Senator McCarthy days of Wisconsin, except on lower levels. In many ways, they would make old Senator McCarthy seem sort of honest, you know. At least he was open on it. You see, this is a problem that we have, because our culture, too, is so suffused with that Protestant ethic of self-righteousness. And there's nothing worse than a combination not only of power, but of self-righteousness. I think this is a point that Fulbright was trying to reach across to. And one thing for the Romans to try to conquer the world, but they never expected them to love them, and they weren't making any bones about it. We're taking over power because we want the power, you know, instead of, we're doing it to free you, you know. We're doing it for you, whether you like it or not. Were we going to the Dominicans? Hell, we didn't even know which side we were on for the first few days. I think our going to the Dominicans was exactly on the same par, word for word, comma for comma, and iota for iota, as the Russians going into Hungary. I don't think there was one damn bit of difference.
Saul Alinsky has a lot of opponents. Certain church groups support him, others attack him, claiming his organization incites class and racial antagonisms. Responsible men accuse him of erecting a power-structured dictatorship based on slum dwellers. Julian Levy of the University of Chicago accuses him of emulating the techniques of lynch mobs. The so-called establishment Alinsky attacks represents chosen city, state, and federal government officials and agencies, including the Office of Economic Opportunity. No assessment of this professional and self-styled radical would be complete without recognizing the great and respected forces that oppose everything Alinsky stands for.
Saul Alinsky is a symbol, and perhaps a byproduct of our times, which are characterized by forms of revolt against many established concepts. While this man is certainly a dramatic protagonist on the stage of American drama, only history can adequately assess whether or not he is as significant as he might appear to millions. In presenting this glimpse of Saul Alinsky, titled I'd Organize Hell, we have had a meeting with a man who has already rocked the boat on at least one of our Bay Area community fronts and may figure prominently in others. KPIX reports Saul Alinsky.